This is episode 11 of the Clare Valley Podcast, bringing you the latest information from the Clare and Gilbert Valleys Council, showcasing events, the ideas, the initiatives and the people of the Clare and Gilbert Valleys region. I'm Annabelle Homer. Since COVID, tourism has boomed in the Clare Valley. But the question is, can this trend be sustained?
Agri-tourism is something that we haven't really explored a lot here, and it would be good to sort of build on that side of things.
And we'll hear how one local business dodged all the obstacles of COVID closures after only opening its doors 2 weeks before COVID hit.
Lots of Victorians, New South Wales, sometimes even the day after a lockdown lifted, they would be here in Clare, so they must have been pretty desperate to get out.
Also, you'll meet one Clare Valley local who travelled to Poland to assist Ukrainian refugees fleeing their homes following Russia's invasion.
And the next day, after I arrived in Poland, I literally walked over to the train station, saw a tent. That's how the journey started of helping out. Completely blindfolded to it, but knowing that I had to be brave and rock up.
But first, let's get the latest from council headquarters. There are moves to rezone some land on White Hart Road at Stanley Flat from rural primary production to rural neighbourhood. This proposed rezoning will allow low-density housing to be developed across 3 lots, approximately 30 hectares. Under the Act, the landholder wanting to rezone the land no longer needs to seek formal approval through council. Instead, it's a ministerial decision. The council supports the proposed rezoning. Here's CEO Dr. Helen McDonald with all the details.
The location is ideal because it's right against existing rural living on White Hart Road, so it would be essentially providing more opportunities for people who want that.
It's not driven by council, so what's the process to enable that rezoning to happen?
It's actually a ministerial decision, so they have to do a whole lot of sort of groundwork and study. It's not just, we want to do this. It's more, these are the issues, costs, etc., what needs to be done. Is there any contaminated soil? Traffic issues, is it going to create problems? All sorts of things, services. So all of those things need to be mapped out. So if you just think it's like a, developer's got a block of land and they're going forward with it, then there'll be a whole lot of questions that would normally be asked in terms of the viability of the proposal. So an application will ultimately go to the minister and it's a ministerial decision.
Do the neighbouring community, do they get a say in what goes? What happens?
Under the new code, things are a little bit different, but yes, there has to be consultation with the immediate neighbours. But my understanding from URPS who are doing the work that they will be consulting more broadly, and one of the reasons that they came to council at the last council meeting was part of their consultation process. They obviously wanted to understand the support that council did or did not have for the proposal. So that's essentially where it is.
From a council perspective, is this something that the organisation welcomes, considering there is a shortage of rural living blocks in the Clare Valley? Yeah,
well, there is a shortage, although we haven't studied it in depth because the more immediate shortage is really residential. Certainly at the council meeting, the councillors did support it very much and argued that it was a great thing that this does happen, and it's great that an individual property owner is doing it and council's not doing it. So it's obviously less of an impact on the ratepayers from a cost point of view. But especially with council's strategic plan, which is about growing the population, part of being able to grow the population is you actually have space for people to either build or buy, existing houses, so a developer might come in and build the houses. So yes, it is a very positive thing.
There is that argument currently where there's more and more housing going on profitable farming country, and when does it end?
It's a balancing issue between, the desire to grow the population and make Clare sustainable to the future as a town, as a service centre, because if we don't have a reasonable sized population, then we'll just see services disappear and it will become a backwater. That's the balancing act in terms of providing opportunities for new residential areas, whether they're rural living or more dense residential blocks.
Well, staying with land and developing housing models for the future, I understand that the UniSA has put an application to the LGA to investigate housing models for Ngadjuri people to return to country. What's Council's involvement with this?
UniSA has a formal relationship with Ngadjuri Nation, looking at opportunities or projects that can help address all the issues related to the removal of Ngadjuri from their land. And one of the big issues that Ngadjuri are facing, and they mention it to me quite frequently, is the fact that, well, two things is, one, for those that want to permanently return, they're trying to get rental properties is near impossible, either because they're not available or they're just too expensive. And the other is in terms of affordable temporary housing, for short-term stays can be quite difficult for them as well. So they're the issues, and UniSA approached me, and given what we have in our reconciliation plan, which was one of the issues, was around advocating for housing opportunities for Ngadjuri and also a council's strategic plan, it was a good fit for us to be a partner. It's not a financial partnership, it's a partnership in terms of they'll need to go through our planning department, so being able to facilitate that for them, and also work with the local community to try and identify a block of land that this particular short-term housing project could be used or be located, I should say.
How much land and how much housing is needed?
Well, that's yet to be determined because it depends on the funding that they get and the cost of housing, each individual house, because what we're looking at is modular houses and totally self-contained. Until we determine what those key kind of fundamentals are in terms of the number of houses that are being proposed to put on a location, that will determine the size of the block. The idea is it's a short-term trial, which is not just useful for Ngadjuri or other First Nations group, it's actually useful for all of regional South Australia. If there's chronic housing shortages, there's a model that can be implemented really quickly, because what we're talking about is, modular or prefabricated housing that could be located nearby any township there where there's chronic housing shortages, and without having to do all that work of putting in services, which is expensive and time-consuming. So that's the kind of nub of the proposal, which, if it works, has potentially great benefits for regional South Australia.
Moving on to the event support program funding, $20,000 was up for grabs and there were 9 submissions. Who were the successful submissions?
Have two categories. One is a regional event, which attracts more funding than the other category, which is for new events. And so the regional events that have been successful this time round are the Clare Valley Gourmet Valley Week and the Polo in the Vines. And the Clare Valley Racing Club have been successful, which is the first time they've been funded, I believe, through this particular funding program.
And how much do those 3 get each? Is it about $5,000?
So they're getting $5,000 of support funding for their events.
And the Jazzing and Madonna, Mintero Car and Bike Show and SA Rural Women's Gathering, they're getting funding as well, but not as much, I understand?
Yeah, they're much smaller events and they're also new events, so first-time events, and so they've been selected from those applications for between $1,500 and $2,000.
Unfortunately, there were some events that weren't successful, the Autumn Garden Festival, Festival of Lamb and the Tali Christmas Party. So why weren't they successful?
Well, the Tali Christmas Party, we actually provide funding through a different source for the Christmas events for townships, so no double dipping, basically. The other 2 events are events that have been funded over the last few years, so particularly the Garden Festival, I think, is a well-established event, as is the Lamb Festival as well.
Dr. Helen McDonald, CEO of the Clare and Gilbert Valleys Council. And just staying with local events for just a moment, Council has been coordinating some NAIDOC events throughout August, which is a yearly commitment by Council. There was the Family Fun Day at Melrose Park in conjunction with the model trains. Historian and anthropologist Skye Krikoff led a discussion understanding Aboriginal settler relations in Adelaide and Clare districts during the mid-1800s. A photographic exhibition showcasing historical photos of the Ngadjuri people across the mid-north, a display of First Nation artefacts at the library, and an afternoon tea with the Ngadjuri elders. It's been fairly well publicised that the Clare Valley experienced a major surge in tourism since COVID hit 2.5 years ago, a trend which was totally unexpected and has exceeded the expectations of the local and state tourism industry. I caught up with Regional Tourism Manager for the Clare Valley, Mim Ward, to find out how this growth can be sustained and what future trends the Valley can capitalise on in this tourism space.
Mim, thank you so much for joining me on the Clare Valley Podcast today. You're one busy lady pretty much running the tourism industry in the Clare Valley, in the Gilbert Valley area. How have you been through the whole COVID situation, managing the whole tourism aspect? Probably one of the toughest times, essentially, for tourism.
Annabelle, it has been very interesting and probably not something that I factored in when I first took this job on 4 years ago. I came back after having 6 months away at the end of 2019 and came back to this role in January 2000, and about 6 weeks into the role, of course, everything got shut down, and suddenly there's no industry anymore, and it was very surreal. It was quite crazy, and I think everyone, though, was in the same state of shock at that time, so it wasn't as though we were standalone. But to have a whole industry just close overnight was, pretty unbelievable.
So how do you navigate through that? What was your initial thoughts of, okay, how do we get through this period?
It was tricky. I was lucky because we got really good support through the South Australian Tourism Commission and from there with the state government. So from a very early stage, we started having weekly, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week meetings with them, so that any new bit of information or funding or health information that came out, we were given it straight away, and then you could disseminate it out to the industry. And I think that really helped, because when it first happened, you just sort of thought, there's nothing I can do here. I don't know sort of how to even start on that recovery process. But once information started coming out and you could get that out to people, you sort of thought, oh, this is helping, that's good. So it was that to begin with. And then when was it? In June, when the government said that they'd reopen the borders, you sort of breathed a little bit more and you thought, oh, okay, this would be great. We were talking before and saying how at the beginning of that year we had new businesses start up in the region, and you just felt gutted for them because you thought, oh my God, you've just opened your doors and now that's all been taken away from you.
You're referring to the coffee shops in the main street
of
Clare.
I am. And there were others as well, but they were the two that sort of stick out in my mind at this stage, and good on them. They actually kept their doors open when they could. And so then when the borders reopened in June and people started coming back in, they could then, keep going under restrictions, of course, but they could actually start trading properly again. And the thing that happened here that was sort of, again, quite remarkable was that we just had more and more people coming. As soon as those borders were open, the region became a very much sought-after destination. In South Australia, there are 11 regional areas, and the Clare Valley is the second smallest per capita only to Kangaroo Islands. I suppose off the back of other regions, we were seen as the little brother, little sister.
And are we still seen that way?
No, we're not.
Oh, so tell me, how has everything exceeded your expectations? Has COVID transformed tourism?
Absolutely, no, it has. It's the result that we've had during COVID has exceeded everybody's expectations. That's the Tourism Commission's, I think, council levels, definitely ground levels and operator levels. So we have the regional visitor strategy, which is developed with the South Australian Tourism Commission, councils, community operators, and that sort of determines what our goals are for the a 5-year period, and then what our expenditure goal is as well. And in addition to that, the SATC also puts out their 2030 tourism sector plan. And that too sets goals for each of the regions. So at the end of last year, we had surpassed the 2025 goal and also had surpassed our 2030 goal. So in some ways I can say my job here is done, but then I could also say that it has nothing to do with me and we're just blessed with fabulous operators.
I was going to say, pat yourself on the back.
No. I think it's more that we do have really good product and we have really a genuine product. We have a very authentic product up here. You know, I think operators are very true to where they come from. So we have the fabulous food and wine offering that is very much the Clare Valley itself region.
But have all the regions experienced that as well?
No.
Oh, really? So
No.
Is it just Clare that's...
No, look, there have been a couple... Eyre Peninsula has done really well and Fleurier, I think, has done really well. Oh, there might be others. I'm sorry. I apologise to anybody else who I've forgotten. So our 2030 target was 166 million. Now, at the end of last year, we were 172 and it has gone above that since then. So... it is fabulous. The challenge now is how do we keep that going?
And what strategies have you got in place to keep it going?
So last year we really looked at putting things out to the Eastern Board. So we did a promotion with Qantas Travel Insider that we sort of did a month where we had, it went out on their EDMs, their email direct marketing, and it was online on the Qantas page. Then that stays up there for 12 months and we sort of looked at doing different things we combined with the winemakers for gourmet and we had the Wanganines come up and do sort of their little... they're not influencers, they're people of influence, as Pippa definitely pointed out to us. And, you know, that sort of gained a really good reaction to people. So it's really now how do we get out to, again, a larger audience.
But saying that, can we service this growing tourism market? I mean, are there more accommodation places opening up?
There are definitely more accommodation places in the planning. At the moment, you know, just sort of off the top of my head, we have at least 30 to 40 more rooms being considered, and that's just the ones that I know about at this stage. And then we have things like Country Club are doing an upgrade on there, so they receive funding through the Tourism Industry Development Fund, which was done during COVID, which was a really huge boost to businesses right throughout South Australia. That's the beauty of what has happened, is that people have really looked at what product we have here, where the gaps are, and accommodation is definitely one of our gaps, and definitely that luxury end accommodation. So there's definitely a lot of talk going on at the moment around that area.
I heard there's some tiny houses being planned.
There are actually some new tiny houses open in Mintero.
In Mintero?
Yeah,
oh, okay.
So that was opened by Cabins, and Cabins are a company that... they have a really big following. They're Australia-wide, so they do it all for you. So you just need to give them the land. They will go to council. They'll get it all organised for you. They'll develop the pods. They'll bring them in. They'll put them in. They market them for you. They do the bookings. The only thing they don't do are the things that are on site, like the cleaning and the, you know, if they have firewood, that's the firewood prep. And that's the hardest thing at the moment, is that the whole region is so busy. To try and find someone to come and clean your B&B or your cabin or wherever is really difficult.
Well, we've talked about the success of the Clare Valley. Have there been businesses that haven't survived the COVID epidemic, or have most pulled through?
I can't be 100% sure. I mean, we have had businesses close. The biggest problems that we have at the moment, and this is happening all over the place, is that you can't get the staff to actually service your operation to the level that you want to. And I think that's one of the hardest things that's really sort of hitting people, hitting operators at the moment. And then, of course, if you can get the staff to come up here, where are you going to put them? Because accommodation is at an absolute premium or is not available at all. Yeah, and I mean, that is South Australia-wide. It's just a crazy problem that you think, how did this just happen all of a sudden? But it has.
Where do you want to see the Clare Valley in the next 5 years? And not just Clare Valley, I should mention Borough and also down to Port Wakefield, which is also
we are a
Hill.
huge region. I think when you look at the trends in tourism, so agri-tourism is really on the rise at the moment, health and wellness is on the rise at the moment, food and wine is always a desired product. The Clare Valley is really well placed to capitalise on all of those areas. So agri-tourism is something that we haven't really explored a lot here. It would be good to build on that side of things. We had a tourism experience forum here seems ages ago too, about 6 weeks ago, and we had a little Shark Tank at the end of it, and one of the products, so we had two products that sort of were highlighted that day, but one of them was a business that is looking at doing remedy cows. So that's where you go and hug a cow. So if you're, feeling a bit stressed out or anything like that, or just if you love animals, you could do it as well. But that connection of getting up close and personal with farm animals and being able to actually give them a hug and a love and that sort of thing is supposed to be really, really beneficial for the soul. So that's a totally different form of agri-tourism. That's sort of taking it out there. But I love that idea, and I think, something a bit left of centre is always exciting. And then the other thing with the Clare Valley is that we have an amazing network of trails here. So we're crossed by the Hyson, Mawson, Lavender Trail. We have the Clare Valley Short Walks so that was the Clare and Gilbert Valley Council got a consultancy to look at all the different trails throughout the region and come up with 6 short walks that people could do in half a day maximum. But that really sort of keeps people here for that little bit longer. Mm-hmm. And of course we have the fabulous Riesling Trail, and if you haven't yet got on an e-bike and done the Riesling Trail, I don't think you've lived. Myself, so
what have you done it?
I have. I actually had last year. We had all the regional tourism managers get together, and we take it to another region so that you can do a little bit of a showcase. So we had them all up here, and for the first time I went and got on an e-bike and did the Riesling Trail. It was the best fun ever.
I love how it's an e-bike. You don't want to pedal.
No, you don't want any hard work at all. So, yes, but I just think the trails, with the health and wellness, we've got a real opportunity there to capitalise on it.
It's been fascinating hearing about how tourism is going in the Clare and Gilbert Valleys area. Kudos to you, even though you can't say that it's all about what you've done. It's fantastic, the result that has happened in the Clare Valley following COVID.
Oh, well, thank you, Annabelle. I just think we are blessed to have a fabulous region, good operators. We're close to Adelaide. We're only, an hour and a half drive from the centre of Adelaide. And you're here in a beautiful destination where you can stay 2 or 3 days. You can go out, you can discover the history and the heritage over in Mintero and in Borough. You've got the silo art in Udunda and Farrell Flat.
Yeah. I love how all the Paxton cottages have been
they look fantastic.
Redeveloped.
Well, and then that was another big thing they had there was the Copper and Stone Festival that was held at the back of the accommodation at Paxton, and it was fabulous. There were so many people there. It was such a good lineup of operators, and it was in February, so it really sort of said, okay, the Clare Valley tourism region is open again for business. So kudos to them, definitely.
Hi, I'm Henry from Cafe 1871. I'm the general manager and barista. Yeah, COVID was scary for us, just like it was for everyone. We actually opened the cafe 2 weeks prior to COVID. We had 2 weeks of awesome service, lots of customers, local customers giving us support. And then during COVID, we had to close down just like everyone else. We were really lucky that we got to stay open. We only closed for a week, and then we reopened just serving takeaway coffees and toasties out the window. It only took maybe 4 or 5 days where we were still we were back up to doing 150 coffees and 50 toasties. It was just a place that people could meet up outside of being at home and meet up in public somewhere where they could still socially distance outside. And
people still need their coffee even during COVID times. So 150 coffees a day, is that the average? So it went back to what it usually is?
When we first started, it wasn't quite back up to normal. Our average at the moment is about 250. When we first started, it was up to about 300. But that was just because we were the new cafe on the block, so everyone was trying us out. But we have about 200 regular customers now, which is really good.
If you didn't have that bifold window, what would that have meant for 1871 going through COVID?
Yeah, thanks, ladies. So with the bifold window, that just allowed us to maximise our waiting space. COVID happened right before Clare winter, so obviously it wasn't ideal to have people waiting outside. So we tried to get as many people inside as we could, but with limited space, it was difficult. So without being able to serve outside, it would have been a lot harder to communicate with customers when their orders were ready, and just have that general gas bag in the morning of people standing at the window having a chat. Basically, connection with customers and being a little bit more interpersonal was probably a big difference having the bifold.
There's been so many tourists that have come from over the border, even around South Australia during COVID. Did you find out where most people came from? Did you have those discussions with tourists as they came through?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the things that keep you going, like, is the customer service side of things. And we didn't get many Western Australians because I think they were in lockdown the whole time, but lots of Victorians, New South Wales, sometimes even the day after a lockdown lifted, they would be in Clare. So they must have been pretty desperate to get out.
So what's ahead for 1871 heading into spring?
Oh, heading into spring, that's busy period in Clare. So we're just ready for the waves of tourists that come through. As soon as it hits mid-September, things really start to pick up. So we're just currently getting menus ready and training up the staff ready for the busy period.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me, and good luck for the rest of 2022.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to help out.
Clare Valley Podcast.
Clare Valley Podcast.
You're listening.
Clare Valley Podcast.
Clare Valley Podcast.
The war between Russia and Ukraine has been going for over 180 days. It's the biggest war in Europe since World War II, and there's no signs of it easing. Russia is deliberately targeting schools, theatres, hospitals, and the Ukrainian people have suffered immeasurable abuse and horror. Millions of Ukrainian people have been forced to leave their homes with only the clothes on their back and have crossed the border to Poland and many other European countries, not knowing when they can go home, while their brother or father, uncles, sons have been left behind to fight. While many Australians have supported the war effort by donating money and goods to NGOs, there are some people that have done so much more. One such person is Justyna Rosa from Watervale. She works in suicide prevention and has worked in mental health for 18 years. But she was also born in Poland and still has a deep connection to that part of the world. Earlier this year, she started a GoFundMe page to help raise money for Ukrainian refugees. She then travelled to Krakow in Poland in April to work in the tents for 5 weeks, serving food to tens of thousands of refugees and blogging her journey along the way, detailing where the money that she raised was being spent. 4 months on, Justyna is back home, but she is still donating money back to the Ukrainian refugees, with the total now amounting to $58,000. A warning, some of the content in this story is confronting. This is Justyna's journey.
You know how there's something big that happens, like think of September 11. Most of us know what we were doing when September 11 happened. So when the 24th of February happened, I was at KT's picking up a bottle of wine. It was a Thursday and the news broke out of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I guess it was a shock factor, disbelief that it's happening, that we actually have a war, and it's not just any war, not that any war is any war. It's Russia. It's Russia invading a country, a free country. And it really hit me. And it had a major impact on me mentally and almost physically for the next week and what unfolded from that. So
why did it have an impact on you?
Well, I think because it was a free world, knowing that people in the Ukraine would live just like us. They were a progressive country. They were a free country. I guess further to that, I was born in Poland. It was next door. It was kind of it was real, even more real than being here, and knowing what the history was of Russia and how aggressive they were. What's going to happen? What's going to be next? So throughout that week, I watched the news closely, really closely. And it was the Tuesday following, so Thursday, and then moved to Tuesday the following week. I was in Adelaide. I was speaking to a friend of mine, at that time I decided, you know what, I'm going to go overseas. And she's like, what do you mean you're going to go overseas? I'm like, I'm going to go over and help. And she's basically said, well, what about your kids? I'm like, no, don't worry about that. I'll work through that. So the next day, being Wednesday, I drove back to Watervale. I stopped off at my mum's house at Auburn. I told my mum, I'm like, I'm going to do this. And she's like, well, you can't do this. This is absolutely insane. You've got a family. I'm like, that's okay, mum. Like, they're safe and they're loved. And then my husband, so I contacted Nathan. I'm like, Nathan, I'm going to go to Poland. I'm going to help. And he's like, okay. Let's work through this. I'm like, no, I'm doing it. So by lunchtime, Nathan calls me and he says, I have written, half a page of why you shouldn't go. And I'm like, well, I can write 10 pages of why I should go. So that night we sat down and my rational mind went, okay, let's go on Traveller, the safe travelling place where we have any government updates about what's happening overseas. And at the time, the Australian government did not put any restrictions to travelling to Poland. So I'm like, well, governments know a lot. So if they haven't put anything on there, I think I'm going to go on that to travel. And if between now and my trip there is an upgrade to travel warnings, I will not go. But that was basically the deal, was to go of Safe Traveller. Because although I really wanted to be rational about it, but deep down inside I also knew that we were dealing with Russia, so it's not as there's any logic behind.
Exactly. I know that you have that connection being born in Poland. Did you know people from Ukraine? Was there anyone that you knew that was in danger? And that was one of the driving forces as well.
Look, one of the families that we knew that we were friends with, they were actively going over back to the Ukraine to help people come over to Poland. So they were actively crossing the border to rescue them. They had elderly people who did not want to leave. They didn't believe it was happening. Although
so you were hearing these stories?
Yeah, directly from our Ukrainian friends. At the time, we did set up the GoFundMe page, which, I really thought I'd just raise $5,000 and, we'll just keep transferring the money over. So every time, we got to like $1,000, $2,000, I transferred it, and that money was used to either bring people over from Ukraine or to help them to settle in, because if you can imagine, people come over with nothing, just one bag. So that was the first connection. And I guess what the interesting part of this story is, I went online to Google all these non-government organisations helping out. And I'm like, I'll register with all these. So I sent out all these emails going, okay, so if I go over, I need to be connected to them. So I sent it to Caritas, to Red Cross, to World Central Kitchen, all these major NGOs who I saw on the news were participating. Well, I heard from nobody. And I thought, shit, what am I going to do? And at the time, I knew that people were arriving at the train station because that was on the news. But I didn't want to worry the family. So I said to the family here and over there going, no, look, I've got a gig volunteering. I'll have a routine. It's going to be fine. But they didn't know that I had none of that lined up. So the day I boarded that flight to go overseas and the day I landed, I had absolutely nothing lined up. And the next day after I arrived in Poland, I literally walked over to the train station, saw a tent. That's how the journey started of helping out. So it was just going and completely blindfolded to it, but knowing that I had to be brave and rock up. I could see that one was a food tent, one was one where people were sleeping in, and one was a clothing tent. So I approached the food tent because that's where the biggest amount of activity was. And it was cold, it was quite cold. And there was this young man that walked out and he was taking rubbish out. And
this is in Krakow?
Yeah. And like, it's quite a, central point. It's the Krakow Galleria. It's a major shopping centre with a train station there. So it's quite a big, zone with a lot of people crossing through it. So this young fellow walked out with the rubbish and I approached him saying, can I help out? He's like, yep, just go in there and serve food. So I walked in and it was busy. There were people everywhere. It was quite warm in there because the heaters were going. I had to take a breath because there was, it was just buzzing of people, but it's really hard to describe when you've got people who are escaping a place. Is it fear? Is it peace because all of a sudden they are in a safe place? Is it emptiness? At that point, I was pointed to a table and they were giving out fruit salad. And the whole thing later on, as I found out, the reason they were giving fruit salad is because they were giving other food too, but they wanted people to have access to healthy food, knowing that they were escaping, that, the bodies run down, they needed to have access to nutritious food. So I was scooping this fruit salad into a cup one cup after the other. And I was just looking down. I wanted to perfect, my kind of how I was doing it, making sure I get the right serve. So I was just looking down, and handing it out. And all of a sudden I looked up and there was this little kid, about Sebastian's age. And sorry, I'm getting a bit emotional now. And, you make eye contact and you realise that this could be your little human. And you think, okay, I get it. I get why I'm here. And I had to tell myself to get my shit together, smile. You're here to give the best smile and the best service and the warmest, hug in a glance that you can possibly give someone. And that was day one. And, there was thousands of people that were served that day. And, you have this silence when you look into someone's eyes, but you just smile and everyone's grateful and everyone nods and there's this silence of appreciation and, the acknowledgement. And the volunteers, and what I found out really soon after, is that 95% of the volunteers in the tent were not Polish. They were from all around the world. I was the only Aussie. We had people from Japan, we had people from Canada, we had people from the US, from Italy, from Holland, from the UK, from Ireland. All these people that came together to help.
What was your daily routine there?
Yeah.
Because I can imagine it would have been long hours. And did you have somewhere to stay? I know that's probably not that important in the scheme of things, but...
Well, I was very privileged because I guess much more privileged than others because I did have a free apartment that I could use that belonged to one of my distant family members over there. Whereas the volunteers from all across the world, they stayed in hostels. Mm. So they paid, every night to stay in a hostel, which was amazing. I guess from a routine perspective, the shift started at 8. So at 8 we'll go and we'll pick up the fruit for the fruit bar, I should say, and then we'll set up and then we start cutting and preparing and then serving. It will probably take us about 4 or 5 hours to be, from a start to finish of the actual fruit service. And then we'll tend to go and debrief, have a moment to debrief before the next part of the day started. I should also say that the fruit bar was run completely on donations. So we had sponsors. So the money that we had coming from the GoFundMe from Clare Valley was actually then servicing that fruit station.
I was going to say where that money went to.
Yeah. So none of that was funded by any government. It was all the free will of people. That's the only way it functioned, being turned around by the volunteers on the ground. So it was quite phenomenal. I think another thing that was amazing too was guys that I met, Mark, who was from the US, beautiful father of 2 girls. He was actually he was using his points to stay at the Sheraton. Fancy, for the volunteer. But anyway, the Sheraton would take in people, so they were taking Ukrainian refugees in. And then with that, there was a chef named Alicia who would use the kitchen after hours to cook thousands of meals to then drive them over to the Ukraine. The general manager of the Sheraton gave us one of the rooms so we can store any of the things that we were packing for the Ukraine, particularly the medical needs. So to me, I thought it was quite beautiful to have a massive business. All these businesses were contributing to it, either completely free will. Everyone stepped up to make this happen, and it wasn't governments that stepped up. There were individual community members, communities and businesses that really stepped up too.
There were so many other things that you've provided to the Ukrainian people.
Essential goods. So people arrive with a bag. You have got no toothbrush, no toothpaste, no nothing. Say you're a female, you have your period. Kids that needed to continue their education because they were homeschooled. So, believe it or not, there's a war happening, but the Ukrainian education department is still providing schooling over, teams or whatnot. Really? We complain about homeschooling with COVID. Imagine homeschooling of a war. As you're sitting in a shelter, it's absolutely incredible. Anyway, so we worked with Ukrainian women who helped us write a list of essential needs, goods that they needed. Because this isn't about me. I don't know. I wanted to make sure it came from the people. So day in, day out, I would go and buy thousands of essential goods like soaps, shampoos, notepads for the kids, pens,
and socks.
Socks. It's freezing. It was so cold. So those essential goods, which again were only possible because of all the donations that we had from here.
How much money did you raise yourself?
Right now, I think we're at about $58,000, which is amazing. And, also if you consider the currency exchange rate, you might as well times it by 3 because that's what it's worth over there. So it's, it works out to be about, let's make it $160,000 worth of goods were able to purchase. Because originally people wanted to donate goods in Australia, but the posted rates are quite high. Plus it makes sense just to buy things there as needed versus our goods from here.
In one of the posts you mentioned about one of your debrief sessions, and you'll discuss what to spend the money on, and you mentioned the fruit. But the other thing that you spent money on was body bags.
Yeah.
That's quite confronting.
It's really confronting, and it's confronting, and it's also you start to understand how big this is. That you would think that this is something that a government would step up to do, not volunteers, but volunteers are so much more responsive than by the time you get a sign-off from a government to transport body bags in. And that was the time of butcher, so it was an open morgue of people, their bodies, and, there was no response happening at the time. So in order to get in there, these were common people like you and I. They were literally driving in to be able to provide these goods. Once we received a request like a body bags, we would go and source the goods, and we would take them to the Sheraton, and from there on we will, box things up, ready to go on the back of a car to be delivered.
How many body bags are we talking?
Oh, look, we're talking about, I think the first lot was about 500, but by the time we were finished, it was about 2,000. Yeah, it's horrendous.
I presume you would have sat down and had discussions or tried to bond with some of the refugees. What were some of the stories that you heard?
Yeah. I've heard so many stories, but the ones that really, stick out to me or stand out, this particular woman and her husband, they would have been in their 60s. They had a son who stayed behind to fight because, with the mandate of anyone over the age of 18 to 60 had to stay behind and fight. Unless they had something like 3 or 4 children, they had to stay behind. So their son stayed behind. This beautiful couple came into the tent every single day to get food, and every single day they were waiting to know if their son was alive. And he got to a time where they didn't hear from him from days and days and days. And I think what was quite interesting, the bond that you make with complete strangers, the time they heard that he was alive, they came and shared that with me. And, you both laugh and cry and hug, and we are watching the war unfold live. So these people have got air raid alarms on their phone. So they are in a completely different country, but they know if their area they live in is being bombed. So if they have family that chose to be left behind, especially the elderly, they watch it. They watch it basically unfold live. So you've got people holding their breath going, are they going to survive this or not? So this ongoing uncertainty that plays out it's absolutely horrendous.
And the horrible stories that we're hearing about what the Russian soldiers are doing to the Ukrainian people, especially the women as well. Completely.
The rape of women, of children, it was horrendous. And I'm okay because perhaps I work in this space too, so I'm quite exposed to a lot of human horrors, but this is next level. And you might have had volunteers who have never experienced anything like this, and they're hearing these really raw stories of horrendous things happening to children around, say, sexual assault, but then, the fear of children. So I had this little boy telling me how they were escaping. They were all of them in a car, packed in a car. They were going past burning bodies in other cars. They've been shot, or they were trying to go over the mines that are left on the road so people couldn't cross. So this impact's not going to end at the end of this war. This is going to take generations for people to overcome. It's hard now, but isn't going anywhere because of the damage that continues to happen and everything that the next generations have to live with.
In the lead up to Russia invading, were they fully aware that they were in danger, or was it a lot of denial?
Oh, there was a lot of denial. In fact, there was still a lot of denial. My experience was with some of the elders that this was even happening, that some were forced to leave because the children asked them to leave versus what was happening. But at the same time, there was many people who have family in Russia. Family living in Russia didn't believe them this is happening. So you had, sisters talking to each other and going, well, I don't believe you. And all of a sudden the family dynamic falls apart because there's this disbelief in people living in Russia that this is even happening.
Did you ever feel unsafe while you were over there?
Well, yes. I think, but again, it's rational mind. So you'd be walking through the town and you have helicopters flying really low, above you. So everyone looks up. Absolutely everybody looks up because you just don't know, again, how predictable it is. Lviv, which is just over the border, which is the western side of the Ukraine, a lot of people were there and it was seen as a relatively safe Ukrainian city at the time. So a few of our friends that we were working with transporting the goods over there would, often cross and felt quite safe crossing the border going to that western city. And there was this particular incident. One of the chefs, our friends, Alicia, was going over to the Ukraine to take thousands of meals that he cooked to a children's hospital. We also made thousands of little Easter presents for the Ukrainian children in the hospital, plus medical goods. So we just packed this car, and it was early on. It was just around Easter, so I would have been there, I don't know, maybe 10 days, and received a text message from Alicia saying they're being bombed. And then that was it. We didn't hear anything. I remember calling my mum crying, going, I don't know if Alicia is dead or, we haven't heard from anything. Of course, my mum was angry with me. She's like, you shouldn't be there in the first place. I'm like, well, I'm here now. I'm just trying to deal with this. That night, we were all together, I guess trying to be together and make sense of what has or what hasn't happened. We're sitting in this complete uncertainty to know if our friends dead or alive with the airstrikes that took place. We were just leaving the apartment. It was quite late at night, and there was this man walking through with a hoodie, like barely putting his legs forward, and I just realised it was Alicia. So I ran up to him. I dropped my bag, ran up to him, and he just collapsed in my arms, crying, recalling what he saw, recalling the children's hospital. You've got badly injured children, innocent children, limbs missing, no parents, waking up to nobody. Talking about seeing the Russian soldiers who were also in the hospital who were being treated. He was recalling the horror. Other friends were just behind me and we needed to put him to bed. The boys pretty much carried him to bed and he was shaking. He was, laying there in a fetal position, and we wrapped him up in a blanket in a cocoon and, stayed to let him fall asleep. But, we were grateful that he came back to us, but it was one of those moments where you literally hold your breath. The next day, Alicia kind of thought, I'm never going to go back. Like, I can't believe, maybe I've pushed my luck a little bit too far. But that wasn't the case. He got to put himself back together. He said, I need to go back and can keep helping these people, especially seeing what he saw. And Alicia wasn't Polish. He was Italian. Just, again, a random person helping out.
How was it to leave?
Well, there was a significant moment that was actually happening at the time, and that was going towards the Russia's Independence Day, which is the 9th of May. And at the time, people were worried of what was going to happen next. Is there a possibility that Putin is just going to unleash war because he wants to win this war, if there's going to be a nuclear attack? And so there was a lot of unrest in a community as well as media, and not just, Polish media, Ukrainian, the international media, about what could happen on that day. To be honest, it scares the bejesus out of you. You think, I'm right here. If they're going to go, you're only 200 k's away from it. I was sincerely worried. So I thought, it would be time to come home. And I was ready to come home at that time. Although you want to be there. Like, I felt alive. You take away the politics of workplaces. You take away our norms, the stuff that we create in our daily lives, this chaos, in a sense. Sometimes we worry about things that are really not worth worrying about. And you step away from that and you're completely at service to others. And it's not about you, it's not about anything else but being at service to others. And it gives you a sense of freedom. I think I like to draw on something that was said to me before I left, and I think I put it in one of my posts. Ellie Hodges, who's a resident in Watervale, she said to me before I left, she used an analogy. She said that life is brutal. It's brutal and beautiful all at the same time. It's weaving together. And I think it's such a beautiful description, because although there was so much horror happening over there, there was so much beauty in that human connection, the fact that complete strangers stepped up to help.
What's the current state at the moment with, say, the refugee camps and the amount of refugees still coming over the border?
Yeah, I think they've had almost 5 million people have crossed the border to Poland now. What's really sad is that there's a lot of resentment in Poland. It's quite sad. People are thinking that you should be helping Polish people out, not Ukrainian people. So there's a level of resentment and aggression towards the Ukrainian people. 160 days in, people are a little bit over it, which is it's awful. And
where do you fit 5 million people into another country?
Well, look, a couple of million have moved on, but they want to stay. They want to stay because they want to go home. I had beautiful people here in Australia wanting to house Ukrainian people, but Australia's so far away. So my experience talking to them about coming here was that unless they've got friends or family already here, they want us to stay close to home because, you know, their husbands are over the border. The brothers, their sons, they just want to go home. They don't care what state the house is in. They just want to go home. So they used to get assistance. Well, they do get assistance. They got like a 3-year visa, but all the assistance has dried up. It's extremely tough because most of these tents that with food they've all been closed now. In Australia, when we have a natural disaster, we have things like Army Reserve step in. You know, we have got, if you've got the Californian bushfires, well, we send our army over to help or vice versa. But there's no help on the ground. So you've got organisations with existing resources trying to service an additional 3-4 million people. It doesn't work. There's only so much you can do with existing workforce if it's not there. So, you know, that's what they're experiencing.
How are you feeling being back here and hearing about what's going on over there?
I think for a while I felt a little bit empty. You know, I would go for a walk on the Riesling Trail and, you know, trying to make sense of these parallel worlds that we live in. And then I realised there is no sense making any of this. It is just what it is. At first, I might have felt a little bit of anger towards, you know, I guess to us sometimes as a community, as a society, how quickly we can turn away and forget things unless they're really in front of us. I have this motto in life that if not me, then who? To step up, because if we are always looking towards other people, sometimes nothing happens. So don't be that person that's looking towards other people for the change. You know, be that change. It doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be a small thing, but don't have the bystander responsibility. So always just step up. Sometimes being back at work full time with the kids, sometimes it's easy for me. It will be very easy for me to say, I can't help anymore. I don't have time to help. But again, who am I not to have time to help? These people also haven't chosen to end up in a completely different country. I feel it'd be a little bit selfish for me to say I don't have time to do this. And that was me or my child. I wouldn't want anyone to look away. And I think in the times of uncertainty, in the times of hurt, you know, you look around and all of us are helpers. We can all help and we all have something to contribute. So I do feel sad that we have looked away, but I am also hopeful that just like I have gone on this, not just a journey overseas, but perhaps an emotional journey trying to sense make of us as a society, everyone's on that journey, you know, and just sometimes it's easy to look away from the pain. Don't look away from the pain. There's also, you learn so much from sitting in that place of pain and discomfort.
You raised $58,000. Are you still sending money over to the Ukraine?
Yeah. So I just did a transfer probably about two weeks ago, another $1,000. So every time I raise about $1,000, I send it over. So there's 2 actually organisations now that I met while I was over there where I support. So one of them is buying essential like staple food items for a week of grocery shopping, and the other one is helping the schools. Because again, I'm really mindful that now if some of these people have settled in and they don't have a job, how do you buy food? I'm pretty sure the inflation rate in Poland is at something like 13%. So, you know, we complain about 6%. So, you know, to buy food over there is really expensive. yes, the schools, so many schools have just disappeared. B, the schools over there have absorbed so many students, and that's huge. You've got teachers who all of a sudden have an increase of 50% of students in their schools, that they're trying to service or teach, nurture, which is absolutely phenomenal. They can't afford that because nobody pays them for that. So, again, I'm really passionate about education, and I think it's a foundation to life. So making sure these kids have a continuum of that nurture through education.
All the money that you raised, was most of that coming from the Clare Valley, do you think?
Yes. I think so. With the $58,000, we had $17,000 that came from my Ponga, because we had friends who ran a quiz night from us. But we would have had maybe about $25,000 coming from the Clare Valley, which was phenomenal. And I feel really bad because being new to the Clare Valley, I don't know that many people, and I feel like I should just walk around and thank everyone, because as a community,
hold a big sign up on the main street. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. So grateful, to have complete strangers trust in you to make sure that the money that they give so generously goes to where it needs to go. So a huge Clare Valley community effort, absolutely amazing, and makes me tear up because, again, complete strangers who I walk past in the street, I've got no idea who you are, but I'm really grateful. Everyone is.
Justyna Rosa. If you would like to donate money to Justyna's GoFundMe page, the details are in the podcast show notes. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please let me or the council know of any stories, issues or community people that should be showcased in this podcast. I would love to hear from you. In the next episode, it's election time. We'll be putting all the council and mayoral nominees in the spotlight. You'll get to know all about them and why you should vote for them. I'm looking forward to this episode, and I hope you will take the time to listen in. This podcast is brought to you by the Clare and Gilbert Valleys Council. I'm Annabelle Homer. I'll catch you next time.